In the face of criticism on both generational ends of her party, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi is open to extending a helping hand to the future Democratic leadership. While still leaving herself in the running for re-election in November, Pelosi says she's purposefully eyeing change within reason. In an interview with the New York Times, Pelosi goes on to explain, quote, "If people want to be the bridge that I'm building toward, they have to show what's on the other side of the bridge." And waiting on the other end could be veteran South Carolina Congressman Jim Clyburn. Clyburn confirmed his intent to run if Pelosi were to fall short of the threshold, saying he would absolutely do it. Clyburn also told the Times that the ascension of a black speaker would, quote, "put to bed forever the notion that the Democratic caucus is taking black voters for granted." When approached about Clyburn's interests, Pelosi says she's untroubled, calling him a beautiful, lovely member of Congress, whom she views as a brother. Casey Hunt, this is your beat. What's going on here? Is there any chance that Nancy Pelosi actually will not be the leader of the Democratic Party after the fall?
I think that it's a very real possibility simply because so many people who are running out in the country, if there is this blue wave, they all come to Washington. A lot of them have said, I'm not going to back Nancy Pelosi. So it's a very tough vote to ask them to take. Remember, this will happen first behind closed doors, but then it has to be a full vote in public on the floor of the House. So for her to say to all these people who had just gotten elected, hey, the first thing I want you to do is break a promise you made to your voters, that's a tough spot to be in. Now, the succession is complicated. And look, Jim Clyburn wouldn't be doing that without Nancy Pelosi's blessing, first of all. He does not necessarily represent the generational change that a lot of these younger members have been demanding. Now, that said, he points out, you know, the significance of having an African-American speaker, I think, would be hard to miss, and I think would generate a lot of support. Democrats are really in a bind with Joe Crowley's loss. He was somebody who represented generational change and who also knew how to run a conference. Remember, I mean, Nancy Pelosi's not wrong when she says she is an extraordinarily accomplished legislator. The things that she has pulled off on the floor for her party and behind the scenes, and that is experience that is actually needed, and that there aren't that many people in the Democratic caucus who have.
We've heard, Casey, from people campaigning, Democrats out campaigning, getting ready for the fall, and people who've already been elected in special elections this year, saying they would not support Nancy Pelosi. Have you seen it inside the chamber, though? Inside, up on Capitol Hill? Are you hearing it out loud or just privately?
I think there's a reason why we're asking these candidates what their position is on her. And Gene Robinson, I mean, you know as well as anyone that, you know, she did see this challenge from Tim Ryan via Seth Moulton, probably behind the scenes, who Nancy Pelosi doesn't have a great relationship with. What's your view on how this could play out, especially kind of the Clyburn piece of it? I mean, he's a very interesting figure in this drama.
Yeah, the Clyburn announcement surprised me, actually, and you're absolutely right that there's no way he would have gone out on that limb without her support or her approval. She clearly would have known about it in advance. You know, the question really is one of generational change, and you know, the number 1, 2, and 3 Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Steny Hoyer, and Jim Clyburn, are all in their 70s. And that is, you know, it's as skilled and accomplished as Nancy Pelosi is, and she's a great fundraiser. I mean, she's, and in addition to being a great legislator, but you know, 3 leaders in their 70s is not a great look for a party that wants to promise something new. And one thing she did not do, and you have to say, is sort of cultivate and bring up that sort of younger leadership. You'd argue maybe Crowley, and then he lost, but it's not as if she went out of her way to put in place that younger generation that would naturally succeed her. So so the party is in a bind, and I'm not sure. I'm not sure they're gonna dump her. So we'll see.
You know, I'm gonna just bring my branding hat in and talk about optics and talk about. The Democrats need to turn the page, and it starts with the presidential hopefuls, the Bernie Sanders and the Elizabeth Warrens, and it goes to the Nancy Pelosi's. They have to send out a signal, and it's not even age, but that there's a freshness. Look, Donald Trump was 70, but it was a completely it was an advertising or permission to believe. You've got to give voters permission to believe there's something new. And even if Nancy Pelosi or Clyburn are delivering a new message, it's not going to feel new. It was interesting. I've talked about this. I'm working with the DNC on their messaging, and they said, well, no matter what message we put out there, Trump owns the news cycle, and then how do we respond to it? And I said, well, part of your problem is you don't have your new faces. And if I were you guys, I would put together what I would call my Super A team, 7 or 8 new faces that become the daily response to Trump, that become the conglomerate faces of the party. Because what happens now, no matter what the response to Trump is, when it's being delivered by, I don't want to call these old faces, but these faces that stand for
familiar faces.
Familiar faces, what's wrong with the party. Just as a Brandon guy, and I like Nancy Pelosi, they need that change. They got to give voters permission to believe.
And then, Betsy, there's the question of who the Democratic Party is exactly. A guy like Tim Ryan, for example, from Ohio, can say, I can go into Youngstown and get back those voters who flipped from Democrat to vote for Donald Trump, and that Nancy Pelosi, as she has been by the president and Republicans, will be held up as this avatar of the left, the San Francisco left, who wants to take something away from you. Tim Ryan and those people can make the case that I can get you back the people you lost last time around.
That's right. And let's remember that a core component of the Democratic Party, which is the labor movement, has been absolutely pummeled over the last several decades, culminating in the Janus Supreme Court decision that dramatically reduced the ability of labor unions to take dues from people who are in the industries that they represent. So as that component of the Democratic Party has become just significantly weakened, smaller, less politically effective, the Democratic Party has kind of had to go through this process of a bit of soul searching, and that seems to be playing out quite publicly, particularly when you look at polls that come out that show Democrats, members of the Democratic Party, may lean more in favor of socialism rather than capitalism. That's something that makes older members of the party, more moderate, more centrist members deeply consternated. And what else challenges the Democratic Party is that there are a lot of Republicans who feel that they've been abandoned by Trump's version of the GOP. You have a number of moderate, never Trump types who are looking to potentially find a place in the Democratic Party and finding a way that, for instance, the Max Boots of the world and the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes could all come together around one candidate or one set of issues is almost inconceivable. So there's a significant identity crisis.
We'll see this fall. Betsy Woodruff, thanks so much for being with us. Good to see you.
Sure thing.
Coming up, the top Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee warns that the president could go after Bob Mueller's security clearance next. Talk about that and the president's admission that his move against John Brennan was due to his involvement in the Russia probe. Morning Joe's coming back with much more.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.